Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. So first of all, before we begin this, obviously as you've seen from the beginning of today up until now, we try very, very hard to make sure to touch on all different aspects of tax lien investing and real estate investing, from the foreclosure side to the attorney side to the adjudicated side to the investor side. And oftentimes, it's good to hear from your peers as investors or your clients if you're service providers. And as you heard from the impressive bios from these three gentlemen, they know what they're doing when it comes to New Orleans real estate Louisiana real estate and Louisiana property tax liens. So I want to open this up to all of you. I have plenty of questions for them, and I know most of the answers. So you guys, why don't you ask the questions that you would like to hear from these guys. I'm just going to start out with a general one though, to try to introduce each of your backgrounds. If each of you could just spend a couple minutes telling us how you got into tax liens specifically. I mean, usually there's an interesting story or a twist, or maybe it was kind of run-of-the-mill client. But you want to start, Tim?
I'll start. I started a number of years ago. Strictly as I had a little bit of money and I didn't have enough to actually get into something that, could be secured. So to me, it was one of those paths that you can navigate that doesn't require a lot of capital up front. And it is sort of like a lottery ticket. You can cash it in possibly, and there's a benefit either way of the interest or the property, given some legwork. And I just saw it as a way to potentially grow a portfolio. And also something that you can, market and also convey to other parties. So simply because you buy a tax sale or a tax year, you can convey that interest to anyone for any amount of money. Obviously, there's levels of protection that you have to go through, but it was just out of sort of not having the proper capital to get into the next investment, I guess.
Interesting.
I had a gentleman approach me that was in foreclosure, and I started looking at ways to save his house. And in the abstract, it showed that the house had been sold for a tax deed, and that tax deed was beyond the redemptive period. And on just a whim, I called, or actually had somebody call the guy who owned the tax deed, and we negotiated that he would sell to this third party the tax deed. And then we called the mortgage company, and they readily acknowledged that they had lost their interest to the tax deed, and they would sell their whole mortgage for like $2,000. So we had at that point like $3,000 in a tax deed, and we had like $2,000 in a mortgage, and the house was worth $100,000. And I've said, hey, there's money in that, and that's how I got started.
Most of the property that I have bought in the last 25 years have been traditional. Realtors would call you and say, hey, I got this, or somebody would be getting out of the business, and I'd secure properties that way. Since I met Mr. Evans, he's brought me quite a few deals that through tax deed, and the objective for me has always been cash flow. Whether the title was questionable, if it or not, as long as it cash flowed, that was my interest. So tax deeds definitely interest me, and I haven't done as many as I'd like to do, and I feel like today has been very educational for myself, that I would like to do more, and my objective is to ideally end up with the property and make a good return on it.
And so all three of you touched on cash flow versus real estate ownership as really the two ultimate outcomes here, by one way, by one leverage point or another. Can we just do a quick show of hands in terms of like who wants cash flow out of these liens versus who wants real estate? Is there how much of the room is looking for yield, is looking to get paid back, is looking for the cash flow out of these liens? So a good portion. Yeah. Well, that's the third one. Yeah, exactly. And then how many people would like the real estate? Okay. And so maybe if you guys can talk a little bit about what the difference is between the two, because obviously, as you pointed out, you could get both. Well, you can't get both on the same property, but you could endeavor to get both in a diversified portfolio. So, what are the different strategies that one might use to say, okay, I'm more likely to get real estate than this one, or just talk about the difference between those two objectives.
From my experience, if you want rent roll, or rather the analysis on the front end, for me has always been looking at just in the NOLA assessor database. I'm not familiar with the Baton Rouge tax database, but in New Orleans, the NOLAassessor.com, if you're not familiar with it, it's actually a pretty good website for New Orleans standards. But it shows who is in possession of, or rather on title. And a lot of times it's accurate. And it shows heirs, and it shows succession, and it shows death and seizure, and this is just a cursory sort of, especially when you're doing the actual bidding, to do your homework and figure out if it's just one party, the likelihood is that they're going to redeem. And so if you just want money back on interest, great, buy it and move forward. But if there's a sort of, again, analytically, if you can project and go, and obviously it's going to vary by example, disjointed family members that no one wanted to pay the taxes, so therefore the tax went up for auction, And it's one of those things, you can navigate that because invariably, and I think New Orleans is somewhat famous for this, the successions don't happen and the families break off. And so it's one of those things where they may be in possession of the property, they may not be in possession of the property. And that's another thing too, wherever you stand on, do you want to try and displace someone or are you trying to buy blight? It all comes down to your goal. Personally, I'd rather find blight and put it back in the commerce. That's my goal. But oftentimes, I'm going to look at and see if there are multiple family members with different last names, and then how many years of taxes you're buying. Because that's going to give you sort of a perspective of okay, we're going to have to really dig in and do this, and it's likely achievable to maybe secure it and create rent roll. But it's going to vary by example. So I start by looking at the title, the person on title.
My experience is that the first thing you have to do is decide how much of a fight do you want. And I use the two phrases, street law, and there's a law firm that we use that's very upper end. Do you want upper end law or do you want street law? And I learned that because there was a lady who sold me a tax deed for $200 for a house. And when I called the people living in the house, they told me they had bought it from another lady. And the lady that I bought my deed from said she wasn't going back over there because they shot at her. Okay, that's a little bit tense. But for less than 10 grand, we got it all scheduled, all handled, all done, nice and quiet, and the people are paying $450 a month. That's not a bad rate of return. Okay? On the other end of that, we tied up with one where there was a title company who had made a mistake. They missed the tax deed. We own the tax deed. Well, as you can understand, that turned into a major big case, and we spent over 50 grand fighting about this tax deed. Ultimately, it was profitable. The point is, you got to decide your risk. If you're in something for 5-10 grand and it's making $400 a month, is that profitable? Yeah, it's probably profitable. But if you're looking to make sure you've got an absolute clear title and all the ducks are in a row, it's a different battle. And that starts with pre-sale notice. At least my experience has. And if all you're trying to do is get possession, then the constitutional amendment that was added where the 18-month thing goes statewide, I think you guys have had it for a while down here, but you can go get a judgment from a judge saying it's blighted property with your tax deed. And all of a sudden, you're in there collecting rent and you don't even own it. You just have a tax deed. Well, you do own it in a context, but you certainly don't have clear title. But yet it can be very profitable. So it's a matter of, do you want possession, or do you want profit, or do you want a clear title? So that's my input on that.
That's very similar to the factors that I look. When I drive by, do I see it? Has it been vacant for a while? How concerned are the heirs? Are they local heirs? Are they live out of state? And many of these properties are because of people not having their affairs in order when someone passes away, and it just, the people that are left behind don't know what to do or don't care enough to do it. So if a property, and that's when I have a option to buy one, if it looks the less it's cared for, the more I'm interested in it. Because if they didn't take the initiative to pay the taxes for, in an ideal situation for me, I'm looking to end up with the property at the end. You know, the older the tax deed is, the more interested I am. If they haven't taken the interest to keep the house up in 3 years, to pay the taxes, chances are them waking up one day out of the blue and saying, hey, I'm gonna go do something with that house that I own a third of in another city, is very limited.
I see a hand over here. Let's take the first question from the audience. No questions for investors? Yeah, exactly, right? Yes.
What's the biggest mistake you see people make in this?
The question was, what's the biggest mistake that you see people make in the tax lien or tax deed industry?
Last week, I had a gentleman walk into my office, and his story is that he bought a tax deed with the intent of moving in this house. And the truth is that tax deed is an absolute nullity. Notice was not given properly. Not only will he not move in the house, he's going to lose hard dollars. So the direct answer to your question is not doing enough research before you put down the dollars. There are parishes that are known for not giving notices, okay? And there are parishes that do a better job of giving notices. And you just have to know your environment. You have to know what they're known for. What are they, what is the risk? And if, especially in a secondary market, you have time in a secondary market to look at that. And that's frankly one of the benefits of what these guys are doing here, is they're giving you the data and they're finding ways to do it. And to me, I personally would like to thank these guys for putting this conference on. I've dealt with several of the companies and some of the attorneys that will be speaking later. And these guys all do it right. They do it first class. They will remove that risk as much as is possible. But the biggest mistake I see is a lack of front-end investigation.
I would agree with that. But on the flop side of that, I think the inability to take a risk, you could lose more by not taking a risk than you could most of the time by, if you're going to wait till every T is crossed and every I is going to, you're not going to buy much.
That's true.
So you gotta step out there at some point and take a chance.
I would just say vetting the process and asking, again, this is a key point to that, but inquire with more than 2 and 3, 4 people about the process.
Right.
I think that's key, and especially when things get media coverage and you get the short story as opposed to you can buy a tax year or you can buy an adjudicated property and just move right in, and it doesn't work like that at all. And then the law is written that you have to maintain it, and you only get $3,000 a year in improvement reimbursement. Those are things that are on books, but doesn't apply to the real world scenario. So I would talk to people that are lawyers that are versed in it and investors that are versed in it, and just sort of, because it is a beaten path, but it's not a well-known beaten path.
Right, that's good. That's good.
And talking to just any lawyer is not going to be successful. The key point to that is to finding someone that does this on a daily basis, because most real estate attorneys I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything that they would say if they don't do this on a regular basis.
It's a very specialized business for sure. Yes?
What percentage of liens that you buy redeem within the 3-year period?
The assessor in East Baton Rouge Parish says it's about 97%.
What's your experience?
My experience is it's much more profitable if they don't buy. And so my specialty is the secondary market. And I actually intentionally go after deeds that are beyond the redemptive period. So my redemption rate's almost none. You know, in fact, if anybody here's got a tax deed beyond the redemption period, I'm looking for those. That's what I look for. So I actually don't remember any that I bought or had an investor buy that were redeemed, with the exception of the $50,000 lawsuit. Those guys did come back and pay.
What about the other?
In terms of the post-redemptive period, I don't see it at all. The pre-redemptive period, I mean, case in point, the most recent Orleans Parish tax sale, I bought 4, I think, and one was sold recently, and another one was redeemed right away. So it really is one of those things where it's fishing. You know, you're in that level of exchange, you're just, like I said, it's kind of like a lottery ticket. So you could see that people just go, oh, you know, I forgot to pay my tax bill. So.
And as well as Mr. Evans, most of what I buy is beyond the redemptive period, so I don't recall any of them that I
So
didn't.
you deal primarily, two gentlemen in the middle and on the left, you deal primarily in the secondary market. You're looking for
I do.
a
That's
buy
correct.
from somebody who's got it, has had it for a couple, 3 years.
That's the ideal situation. Yes, sir.
And to speak a little bit about national averages too, it's a little bit closer to what the Baton Rouge assessor says in terms of redemptions on property tax liens. Louisiana specifically, especially if you're targeting properties that you do not anticipate will redeem to enhance returns or to get special opportunities, that makes a lot of sense that the redemptions would be relatively low. National averages, though, they put closer to 95% before filing for foreclosure, and then post foreclosure filings, you don't take it through the whole process. Typically, you're going to get paid off by somebody at some point during that procedure, whether it's a judicial state or a non-judicial state, or any of the various gray areas that we love in between. It's a pretty high redemption rate nationally in the 29 states in DC that do it. Straight deed states are obviously very different. Yes.
How do you find your secondary sellers?
Like who do I buy from? Is that what you're asking? Networking. That's the best answer I can give you. Well, let me say that. It was the only answer that I had for years was networking. The best opportunity now is on the website you've heard about here today, because that's what they are creating. And that's, guys, I don't know if you can catch the excitement. I feel a little stressed being up here, okay? But these folks that we're surrounded with today, they are on the edge of the cutting edge of creating a phenomenal opportunity for everybody who wants to be involved in tax deeds, because exactly the question you've asked, where do you find a secondary market? Well, that's what these guys are creating, and that's just phenomenal for all of us. It obviously adds to your liquidity. It obviously adds to the buying opportunities. And so other than this kind of system that they're creating, it's extremely difficult and frankly took me years to develop.
How do you get your money out of an insured deed where you have a 1% interest in an owner-occupied property?
I've never had that situation.
Had a little twist in there, huh?
What was that last sentence?
Just say it's owner-occupied. It's not blind.
If it's owner-occupied, you probably shouldn't have
To doing the initial research, okay? I will tell you this. It's a matter of cost analysis. I had a gentleman come in probably a year ago with that exact thing. He bought a $200,000 house, tax deed 1%. That means he's got $2,000 worth of a house. He could, okay, if he wanted, if money wasn't the issue, he could quiet the title to the 1%. Then he could file for a petition, force it to sheriff's sale. The house sells for $200,000 at a sheriff's sale. Not a chance. It's going to sell for $150,000, right? And he can make $1,500. His lawyer fee is going to be much more than that on the quiet title and on the petition suit. So the answer is his best bet is to take that as a tax deduction.
Any other thoughts on the 1%?
I'm a devil's advocate.
Yes.
You know, we have a certain entity that has numerous companies that buys them in East Baton Rouge Parish and all over Illinois, Louisiana, with 1%, and they pay the second-year taxes. But I've seen them clear title on numerous of those. Now, how does that work?
Okay, let me, in case you didn't hear, okay? There is in East Baton Rouge Parish, I can't speak for here, for precedent where somebody buys a 1% interest in a tax deed, files the petition to quiet title and asks for 100%. And the judge gives it to them. And I tell you, if you could do that, do it all day long, and God bless you. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing illegal or immoral or anything else with saying, hey, I bought this tax deed, I want the house. And to the extent that you can do that, yes, that's another alternative, and I have seen that done repeatedly. And in fact, I will buy, I have bought some of those afterwards, and that works well. Yeah, that's another idea. And I will also say this, because I thought of it after I hushed. The best way out of that is to go to the mortgage company that has the $200,000 mortgage on the house, because they will pretty much bail you out and at least get your money back out. That's probably the most practical answer. Is just go to whoever the lien holder is. That's probably the best way out.
Is there a different statistic on that 1% sale versus others in terms of redemption?
I haven't seen any data on that.
You ever seen data?
I don't know the data on that. I mean, I could postulate, but it would be just me making assumptions based on a number of different things. So I'd rather not. How about the converse of what we've been talking about, right? So we've been talking about how, some strategies and some ways to more predictably get the hard asset, the dirt. What if you're out there and you want to encourage redemption, shall we say, right? What are some interesting legal or noticing or creative ways to encourage homeowners or other lien holders or other clouds in the title to redeem you out and pay you off?
I don't have an answer.
You can open up to anybody. I mean, you guys are on this here too. So
Seeing that handled is to make research your best friend. If the house is vacant, which obviously you will know long into the redemptive period, shortly into the redemptive period, you should know that. Hire a detective if you want to, but find a live person. Obviously, you're going to send a letter. You're going to go put a sign on the real estate. You're going to make your presence known to anybody that passes the house, anybody that stops at the house. But if it's vacant, what you really need is to find somebody who cares. And so in your abstract, you'll have the mortgage folks, you'll have any lien holders, you'll have any of those kind of things. And ultimately, if your end game is, I just want my money back out because I've got another investment, then put it on these guys' website and sell it. Or call somebody like me and get out. But my first inclination would be to find any lien holders, any family members. There's a couple of databases that are very, very good at finding relatives, even next door neighbors. I have personally gone knocked on the neighbor's house and said, do you know how to get a hold of that person? I mean, at some point, I'm not saying everybody here's got to go do 1,000 deeds that way, but if it comes down to it, you have to do your best. And if not, then just liquidate it to a second market person.
Is there a question back there? We've talked a little bit about noticing, and obviously the law in Louisiana is very different than the law in much of the rest of the United States, but it is still bound by the Constitution and due process, and you can't deprive somebody of their property without proper notice. So what is what are maybe some stories, some war stories, good or bad, about proper noticing that saved you, or improper noticing that you've seen from someone else or yourself that maybe has cost you some headache, if not money or opportunity?
I always let someone smarter than me do that, so I don't have anything.
That's a good strategy.
That I let someone that's
I just go by the book. If it says to, post it on the building and record it, and I think there's also, I don't think we've mentioned this really because it's not really about tax sales, but acquisitive prescription, where you do, I think, have to give the adjacent parcel owners the opportunity to supersede your interest, which is a whole other thing where like you have to give them 30 days. So I think, and it kind of goes like right hand, left hand in terms of securing the property, depending on how much you want your teeth in it. Because if you really want the property and you don't want to go the route of, you want to get into it sooner than later, acquisitive prescription can be a route depending on your level of ownership. I haven't really encountered some hardships. I mean, I know they're out there. I also know that I think in Orleans Parish, once you secure one, you either have to get a certificate of occupancy or a demolition permit within 180 days. And if you do that, then you're on title, like all other bets are off and you're completely in control of the title. But I guess Orleans Parish dances to a different, I don't know about.
It's a little different. What I've seen is, I've seen folks who felt really, really good about their tax deed have their sale annulled. Okay, and just in case somebody missed the word, an absolute nullity means as though that tax sale never happened. Okay, and you can lose money that way. I mean hard dollars, not just loss of return. You can lose hard dollars that way because of cost, transaction cost. So, notices are important. The way I have solved notice, if I really wanted the property, is send it to Tax Title Services. They're going to notice everybody and their brother. It's just what they do, and it's a good service.
There was a question.
I was wondering, I came across for the first time in the past few months in Louisiana's affidavit of intent to possess, where as I read the act, which is horrible to read, the person can file an affidavit saying they intend to possess this particular property. I think it may only apply to properties that have been adjudicated as blighted or something like that. And my understanding of it is that if they follow through with all the requirements of the act, that the acquisitive prescription period on that is something like 18 months, or it's not a like 30-year acquisitive. 3 years. It's 3-year acquisitive prescription for the persons who say we cannot possess the property. If they follow through with all the requirements. Have you all run into that? Have you seen any advantages of anyone trying to do something like that? It's not exactly
I've seen
lot of these properties, the ones that I looked at, were ones that were
it is 36 months, but if it's deemed blighted, recorded as blighted, like you can look at a property and say that's blighted, but is it recorded as blighted?
But it has some sort of certificate that it was adjudicated by the city.
Well, my point is, if it's blighted, then it's an 18-month. It breaks that time in half. But I have seen people sell those, and then again, it goes down to if they can get their certificate of occupancy within, I think, 180 days from acquisition or entry, then they can clear the title.
There are a number of steps that they have to follow. Right. I didn't try to analyze the act. I saw it and I said, oh, well, this is what this means, that they do have to be notified, and someone who has a notification interest in this. And that was all I was interested in at the time. But it was the first time I became aware of it. I just wondered if it was something that you all had seen.
I've just seen it around Orleans Parish. A couple of years ago, there was a group, I think out of Metairie or Kenner, that was hard targeting properties, and you could see the notices in all these properties, and it was almost like a lottery again, where they were just and I think they were able to actually sell a handful of them, not all of them, and I've started to see some similar signs recently, but yeah, it's by example. It varies by example in my experience.
Just to clarify, there are two different time periods that were mentioned there, and that might be confusing. There's the 18 months is the shorter time period for the redemption of tax sale. The 3 years is the acquisitive prescription time period. Those are two are independent.
Anybody
everybody else. Let's talk about a little bit higher level stuff, right? You've each been investing in the state for quite some time in various capacities. How has it changed, right? How has this landscape changed, independent of kind of the real estate ups and downs and the boom and bust? But as an investor in this state, are there better opportunities now? Are there worse? Is it more competitive? Have some of these legal changes or threatened legal changes really changed the way that you look at the state? What's the landscape been like over the course of your career?
That's a broad question.
I would argue that it's much more competitive, just in general. I made a commitment to myself over the last one where I wouldn't do anything less than 100%, and sure enough, I got the bug and I went for 1%, and that one was redeemed. So it's one of those scenarios where like you got to know your threshold of risk on the front end. Just like if you go to an actual auction, like you only bring so much money with you. But no, I'd say it's highly competitive. Highly competitive.
My experience with tax sales is that it's becoming, isn't there a country song that says I was country before country was cool or something? What I'm saying is I see much more interest in tax sales and tax sale investing than I used to see. Even short sales, 15 years ago, most folks didn't even know what a short sale in real estate was, but now every realtor and their brother knows all about it, and they're good. I'm not criticizing that. It's just knowledge has increased, and with that, there's more players in the market. But I will also say this: with a broad scope of knowledge, there's a danger, because folks they hear what John Paul referenced a while ago. A guy comes in my office maybe 3 weeks ago and says, "Oh, I've been paying the taxes on that property for 3 years. I own it now." No, the person who does own it really appreciates you paying them their taxes, okay? But he heard this article, on the news or the radio or on internet. It's got to be true if it's on the internet. And it just doesn't happen that way. So what I'm saying is, yes, the interest in real estate investing, the interest in tax deeds, the interest in short sales, there's many, many more people who are interested. But what that means is the folks that are at this seminar who are learning the cutting edge stuff and you're going to be better prepared, because most of them are hearing an info commercial or whatever, and they really don't know. And that's also why the guy that answered a while ago, Stephen Morale, those kind of guys are your best friend, because they will keep you out of trouble. And that's knowledge is what it's about.
Yeah, and there is a tremendous amount of misinformation about the lien industry, the deed industry, and some of the other ones that Wendell mentioned that are out there. And that's part of our purpose in running things like Tax Lien Talk is to tell the real story. Another great resource for people that are not members is the National Tax Lien Association, of which we're members. Great institutional people that that many of the people here in the room are members of. They've got some great events and conferences and resources there. We'd definitely encourage you to call those guys. That's good information. That's real. That's valid. That's not late night infomercial. Those types of places are always welcomed by investors. Anything on that, Tim?
I was just I bought my first house when I was 18 years old. I was skinny at the time. It's been a long time since either one of those has happened. But I just, as my bio said, I love it. And back in 1989, 90, I was fortunate to get, not by choice, but just by chance. The house, didn't know that, but houses were so cheap. As many of y'all remember, you spent $3,000 or $4,000 on a house. You could buy in Baton Rouge. You could buy any house that you wanted for any investment grade property for $3,000 or $4,000. If you spent more than $5,000, you just gone crazy. And you could make but very similar to I think in Louisiana with New Orleans and Baton Rouge, anything that you say, you have to say pre-Katrina and post-Katrina, because it did. 10 years later, we're still talking about Katrina because it still has an effect on the prices. And I think that Katrina and the federal money that came in that followed that isolated Louisiana to a great extent of preventing the bubble that took place throughout the rest of the nation. And I mean, Baton Rouge has been a good place to buy. Prices went up after Katrina. We've seen a lot of investors from California come in and think, hey, this is cheap compared to what we're spending in California, so let us buy up. And now that they've left, we get to buy them back for as foreclosure. So it's been a good cycle. So we're still making the same percentage that we was making in the 80s and the 90s. It's just got, the numbers are bigger. The return's the same, but it's the same ratio.
That's interesting. I buy in coastal areas and other markets, and I've always wondered what happens to a lien, a portfolio of active liens or a portfolio of matured deeds after a natural disaster. Do y'all have any experience with that or any color on that? I'm sure it's weird.
I have no experience with that, no, sir.
I know there were a number of investors in New Orleans, as I understand it, that lost some money after that, after Katrina. They came in under pretense, and some of the assumptions they made just didn't happen, and some of them lost pretty serious money. Now, that's not tax deeds. I'm talking about they just bought the property. The tax deed would still be secured. Now, was the property covered by insurance? Those kind of things would come into play. But the good news is, most of the time, you're getting a tax deed for about the value of the land itself, and the land will still be there most of the time, unless you buy like really out on the coast.
And I wasn't involved in tax sales at that point in time, but I can tell you that just from studying the market, we had outsiders come here in 06 and 07, and the response to me was shocking. I'll quote one guy. I drove around Lakeview in 06 and 07, and he was sort of disheartened to see that there wasn't more desperation. That's what he said. And I was like, oh, so this guy was from New York and he thought he could just come down here and, get people pennies on the dollar and just take over. And I was like, and I think he was probably in a good number. I think a lot of people did lose a lot of money then, but I think a lot of people also overinvested then.
Yes.
And you're seeing the results of that now. Sometimes you can see a portfolio just get dumped on the market. It's all relative by example. I mean, regardless of what the lending market did in 07 and 08.
And what we've seen sometimes, at least with clients of ours, after natural disasters, whether it's just a flood or a snowstorm or a hurricane, whatever it is, yeah, I mean, you're usually preserved. But when records are called into question, when it's a real big disaster, and then redundancy might be an issue, and record keeping and those things that really interfere with a judicial process are called into question, that's when you it's going to take a while. But that's just a couple investors that we had experienced things like that. Other questions? So if there's no other questions from the audience, I'm just going to leave us with one other thought from you. Then is we've talked a lot about how we can empower investors and each other to profit from the tax lien and tax deed industry while bolstering communities, but how would you change it? I mean, it's not perfect. Every state's very, very different. You heard from Brian Danos from Arc on Information Systems and Civic Source before say, these are some things that we're trying to do to make it more investor friendly. How would you change it?
Golly, if you could make it bulletproof, I mean, I think the biggest part is the notice, verification of notice. And until you can, make that, airtight, which I don't think you ever will be able to. I mean, granted, we live in the 21st century and we do everything through our little computers in our pockets, but if someone comes along and says, I wasn't notified, then prove or disprove it. That's the biggest, I think that's the linchpin in all of it.
I think taking advantage of the technological changes that have happened in the last, since the internet came on, would be a big step forward. As I understand the law, and I'm not a lawyer, but as I understand it, a reasonable attempt has to be made to reach folks and tell them they didn't pay their taxes. But right now, it's, there's a huge difference between where we are with technology and where we are with the law in terms of notice. I mean, if you go out there and you notify every Betty Jones that's on Facebook and every Betty Jones on Twitter and every Betty Jones, everywhere you can find them, and you put it in the paper and you mail them letters, and you go to TLO and you get tax title services to send out notices, and you've done everything that's reasonable to do, I think the court ought to say, yeah, you lost the property, you didn't pay the taxes, because the truth is they knew they owed the taxes before why they didn't pay them. So to me, there needs to be some legislation that defines what's a reasonable notice in today's technological world.
And I just think that it's almost a reputation thing or a stigma when you tell someone that you acquired a property through a tax lien. It's a reputation that the industry has that,
Sure.
and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if there is a solution for it, but there tends anyway, can't get that word out. But automatically, a property that you've acquired through this process seems to be devalued just because of the question in the mind that there's always going to be the stigma.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of investors and industry organizations like the NTLA that I just mentioned before, like a lot of the companies that are here that are partners in this stuff and sponsors, try to do their best to keep the reputation up, because just like in any industry, the mortgage industry, the real estate industry, any industry, there are bad actors too. And and as John Paul said before, media sensationalizes a lot of things that we've all dealt with, to the positive or the negative. So yeah, it's a very, very good point. Any closing questions? With that, I'd like to thank our three panelists. Thank you guys very much. It's been incredibly important.